Greetings. Welcome to In-Depth. I'm Dike Rostant. We continue to operate under the shadow of Eurocentrism within many spheres, some more overt than others. We discuss the process of decolonization and education with Dr. Claudius Fergus, Director Education and Research at the Emancipation Support Committee TT, and Director of the Crossroads Freedom Project, Shabaka Kambon. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you so much for being here. I want to start with you, please, Dr. Fergus. Where are some of those areas that we have been most successful at decolonization? And at the same token, where do you think we still have the most challenges?
Well, first of all, I think we need to understand what decolonization was all about. You need to look at it in the context of colonialism itself. Colonialism was a comprehensive system of economic exploitation that required the control of everything: education, moral values, police, judiciary, labor, everything. So that decolonization had to address all aspects of colonial control. And the manner in which that was done, the extent to which that was done successfully, and the extent to which change might have been radical or moderate depended on how decolonization happened, whether it was through negotiation or through revolution. If it was through negotiation, like in our case, the colonial powers always found it easy to hand over control of government while retaining all of the structures and values, including, of course, language and all of that. The entire colonial system would have remained intact, essentially. So what we were faced with was a system that we call neocolonialism. And therefore, we should not only be talking about decolonization, but actually de-neocolonization, because at independence, 60 years ago, we had a changing of the guards, but not a change of business, so to speak. And therefore, the control of the economy, the banks, finance, education, the system of racism, and so on, everything remained intact. And the first real challenge to that would have come in 1970 with the Black Power movement. We did get some element of change coming from government's response to the Black Power. So we saw some changes in terms of control of banks, in terms of employment and so on. But we still have a lot to do. The education system is still essentially grounded in neocolonialist values. We still have the Concordat, for example, which is a very prejudiced, racist control by a small element, basically the boards of education, the religious boards over the education system.
And these are some of the things that I want to look at and bring you in, please, Shabaka, in terms of ways that we can start to address this. And sometimes it feels as though some things are a little more symbolic versus practical, but in terms of those acts of decolonization, how do we say it's only now that we got back Patrice Lumumba's tooth that individuals have been asking for, versus saying that we're not consuming Belgian chocolate? What are some of those symbolic versus practical applications as it pertains to decolonization from your vantage point?
Yes, so I just would like to continue where Dr. Fergus left off. I think the point we have to take away is that it was comprehensive. It was granular. Every single aspect of culture that did not come from Europe, every single thing about an individual, the color of your skin, the texture of your hair, the color of your eyes, every single thing was put into a hierarchy, a colonial hierarchy, which was not just Eurocentric, but white supremacist. In fact, we have to start to use some of these labels. And Dr. Fergus was speaking about the education system. And of course, Frantz Fanon, the great Caribbean scholar who theorized about colonialism and decolonization, he referred to colonialism as violence. And when we talk about education, we're talking about epistemic violence, the epistemic violence of colonialism. That is violence enacted on or through knowledge. And what happened in 1962 was that in our attempt to try to create citizens that would be pillars of this new democracy, we inadvertently expanded the epistemic violence of colonialism. So when the colonials left in 62, if you look at the Caribbean, roughly 80% of the people were functionally illiterate. Our first act as an independent people was to try to expand the school system, but we unwittingly expanded the epistemic violence in that regard. It's really important for us to understand this before we start talking about solution.
And one of the things that, and you intone you cite the name Fanon, and using some of those focus and energies from Frantz Fanon and thinking about the mental aspects, because like you said, systemic systems are also built in the mind. So we are what we consume. What are some of those first steps in your view, Dr. Fergus, of educating in a manner that fosters a systemized sort of decolonization?
Well, education and religion went hand in hand in terms of the colonization of the mind, as we call it. So that at emancipation, these things were put in place as part of the controls over the emancipated class. So we have to go back to that point, where it was stated very clearly by what I call the consultant, imperial consultant, was sent down to the Caribbean to recommend the type of education system. And he said, that's a guy named Sterling, John Sterling, that the system to be put in place is one that must exercise control over the minds of the emancipated masses, the laboring classes. He said that. So that system that was not designed to educate, but to control, was the initial objective of education. And that's why my colleague there, Brother Shabaka, said that at 1962, you have this reversion to, or expansion, as he said quite correctly, of the colonialist system within education, so that this is the problem, as I said, of independence or decolonization by negotiation. In order to gain independence, you negotiated a settlement that was not very much in the interest of the nationalists as such, but rather in the interest of the status quo, the elites who were the vanguards of the colonial system, the beneficiaries. So that element of control was the essential objective of education. And what we can say is, in spite of that, some people were able to educate themselves, not because of it, but in spite of it. So there was a gradual emergence of an educated middle class, and that's because a lot of the teachers of the system were in fact of the laboring class, and they were able to create this educated middle class. You would notice that most of the very successful scholars that came out of the system, those who gained scholarships for their professions and so on, either they had one or two parents who were teachers.
And that is a point that we want to come back to when we return from the break. We're actually speaking about decolonization and education. We're doing so with Dr. Claudius Fergus as well as Brother Shabaka Kambon. Stay with us. We return with more. Welcome back. We are going in-depth on decolonization and education with Shabaka Kambon, Director of the Crossroads Freedom Project, as well as Dr. Claudius Fergus, Director of Education and Research at the Emancipation Support Committee of Trinidad and Tobago. And I feel, I said in depth, I almost wanted to say Indaba, and let me put in a plug. There are these sorts of conversations that happen on a very consistent basis, Wednesday evenings on Chalk City 91.1 FM with Vanessa Lillian Herbert. So you tune in for that and you will be edified. But word sound.
But let me put in another plug there. For this evening, we are talking about decolonization. You know,
Definitely.
coincidentally, and we are addressing the issue of decolonization of aesthetics. You know, I think Shabaka broached that, you know, values pertaining to beauty, which have led to the very destructive practice of skin colorization, you know, by the use of destructive chemicals and so on. So if you want some further clarification on that, you know, tune into Indaba this evening.
Yeah, let me expand the conversation a little bit and make it clearer for our listeners. And I want to use that term of violence again. And when we talk about epistemic violence, epistemic violence really did not end at the school curriculum. It was something that was, you know, it pervaded across the colonial space. And so all the street names, the plazas, the statues and monuments you see all around you, they are part of the colonial epistemic violence. And if you want to understand what colonialism was, to really understand what we are celebrating, the values and the people, colonialism was genocide, slavery, indentureship, and apartheid. And let me say that CARICOM is increasingly using the word apartheid to describe that period between the end of emancipation, or the end of apprenticeship, indentureship, and independence. That was a period of apartheid, separateness and unequalness, and white supremacy. And so the icons of those things, of genocide, slavery, indentureship, and apartheid, the icons of those things are the people celebrated on our streets, in our plazas, on our statues. And the tragedy of the current moment, as you say, is that the colonial powers themselves are recoiling from the celebration of these very same people. So Columbus monuments are falling all over the world. In Spain, they want to remove the Columbus monument, right? People like Governor Picton is being removed from his places of worship and honor in Wales and the UK. But here in Trinidad and Tobago, the authorities seem steadfast. They want to continue the open glorification of these icons of colonial violence. And that tells you that they're not yet ready to tackle the content of the curriculum or many other aspects of colonial violence which live with us today.
And with that, I want to get an idea from both of you gentlemen, because like you said, words, sound, and power, the importance of names and symbols, the things that we see, the things that are in our faces, the things that reverberate through our thoughts. But what are your thoughts, both of you gentlemen, please, on the recent monument erected by two young female artists? You just spoke about monuments and structures, but Sherlan Peters and Maria Diaz, in terms of bringing value to certain things and certain energies, ethoses. Dr. Fergus.
Well, just a small correction. The statue was not erected by these two young artists. The statue was commissioned by the Emancipation Support Committee. And they were commissioned to do the artwork. So this monument really is a celebration of the people of that particular part of Port of Spain, who would have made a tremendous contribution to the development of this country. It's placed in Yoruba Square for a particular reason. The Yoruba is one of the dominant African ethnic groups in that region, celebrated by the name Yoruba Square. But it also is positioned, if you notice, in a direct alignment with the Columbus Monument. And when the idea for that monument was born, the point that it was to counter the negative influences of and the negative energies from the Columbus Monument, with the hope that it will help bring about, you know, the removal of the Columbus Monument. So that monument is also a complement to the Emancipation Monument Arise, at the old Cabildo office, the government house, where the Emancipation Proclamation was read in 1834. The two of them should be seen as complements of each other. That's part of changing the landscape. But of course, in doing so, we still have to recognize that there are very offensive memorials to the criminals who would have perpetuated all kinds of genocides, slavery, and defended and participated in the slave trade. We cannot continue to honor these people anymore. And that's where the curriculum comes in, Dike. Our very history, for example, starting in 1498, is really offensive to me. And because nothing in particular happened in this country, in this island in 1498. Columbus just passed by. And because of that, the decision has been taken to begin a new era in 1498, when the native people had remained completely in control of the island. They had not been challenged by any new imperialists, not until later in the 16th century. So 1498 is totally irrelevant to the chronology of this country. Not that you cannot recognize the passing of Columbus because of the consequences that were to follow. But there's nothing that happened in this country to say that 1498 is a milestone in the history of the country. And that's one of the troubling aspects of the colonialist curriculum.
And with that,
where we tend to overemphasize that Eurocentric aspect of our experiences here.
And with that, thank you so much for that. And the last minute and a half is yours, Mr. Kambon.
Okay, let me just say that right now, the Pope is in Canada apologizing for the crimes committed by the Catholic Church against the indigenous people there. While we here continue to celebrate those very crimes with the monument to Christopher Columbus. So the whole world, what is happening in Canada is a demonstration that the whole world is now waking up to the connection between the colonial violence of the past and the contemporary racism of the present. And so if we expect to address that in our society, we have to follow the pattern that's being set by the rest of the world.
Looking at that precedent and owning it and owing ourselves and having the onus upon ourselves to do that necessary work, we want to thank you very much, Director of the Crossroads Freedom Project, Shabaka Kambon, as well as you, Dr. Claudius Fergus, Director, Education and Research at the Emancipation Support Committee of Trinidad and Tobago, talking about decolonization and education. Naturally, this is not a conversation that can stop here, but on behalf of the entire news team, I'm Dike Rostant. This has been In Depth. Thank you so much for joining us.